As a more or less supporter of the filibuster, I'm not thrilled with the former Nevada Senator and Majority Leader Harry Reid's call for Democrats to get rid of it. But I'm even less thrilled by Mitch McConnell's mischaracterization of what happened when Barack Obama was president. If there's one person responsible for the likely eventual final demise of the filibuster, it's Mr. McConnell. Why is the filibuster a requirement for a supermajority of 60 votes to pass legislation or confirm presidential nominees in the Senate justified? Because democracy isn't simply about majority rule. In particular, when majorities are relatively indifferent about an issue and minorities are passionate about it, then there's a good argument that the correct democratic result is for the minority position to triumph. To be sure, as with federalism, in practice the use of the filibuster for a long time was closely intertwined with the fight to preserve white supremacy. Filibusters against civil rights were never democratically legitimate because they were based on elections, especially in the South, that were themselves fundamentally undemocratic. Still, the basic idea of giving intense minorities some institutional support makes some sense. There's also a case for the filibuster in that it empowers individual senators. Without it, especially during this era of polarization, the result is apt to be top-down rule by the majority party. That's what happened in the House after procedures and customs that empowered a wide array of members disappeared. Top-down rule robs Congress of one of its real strengths, the ability of individual members of both chambers, but especially senators, to be influential. So as long as the filibuster is used sparingly, it can be perfectly democratic. But over time, both parties, but particularly Republicans at the start of Bill Clinton's presidency and then again at the start of Barack Obama's presidency, began using the filibuster against more and more things, eventually winding up in 2009 with a Senate in which in effect everything was filibustered. Everyone understood that, with the exception of a few things that were exempt, there was no chance anything could pass with just a simple majority. It had not always been like that. As recently as 1991, the highly controversial Supreme Court nomination of Clarence Thomas was confirmed by a 52-48 vote. The more filibusters, the less stable the filibuster rule became. Democrats never did come close to changing the rule during Bill Clinton's presidency, probably because the administration didn't really get organized until after it had squandered its 2 years of unified Democratic government. Republicans, however, threatened to eliminate the filibuster for judicial nominations when Democrats used it against a handful of George W. Bush's judicial nominees they considered out of the mainstream. They backed off only when 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans cut a deal that Republicans would not impose filibuster reform as long as, in effect, Democrats stopped using it. That probably wasn't a stable compromise, but soon after Democrats took the Senate majority, so it no longer mattered. Then during Barack Obama's administration Republicans didn't just target specific nominees, they used the filibuster against positions, not people, blockading vacancies on the District of Columbia Circuit Court and in several executive branch agencies. That, too, was unstable, and when Republicans refused to cut a deal, Democrats had little choice but to change the rules by majority vote in 2013. Mr. McConnell says that Democrats live to regret that change, but it's a preposterous claim. Republicans broke all precedents and norms when they regained a majority in the 2014 elections by refusing to consider any Supreme Court nominee from Barack Obama and by largely shutting down confirmation of appellate court and many executive branch positions as well. They then removed the filibuster for Supreme Court nominations as soon as Democrats tried to use it, and then eliminated the blue slip procedure that Democrats had retained when Obama was president, which allowed senators an effective veto over judicial nominations in their own state. It's impossible to prove what would have happened had Democrats not acted in 2013, but there's just no reason to believe that Republicans, who at least since 2009 have had zero respect for confirmation norms, would have acted any differently. Which means that confirmations of Mr. Obama's nominations would have ended in 2013, rather than in 2015, and Republicans would have filled all of those additional vacancies after 2016, if Mr. McConnell really respected the filibuster, he would have used it a lot less when his party was in the minority, and when it was in the majority, he would have worked to restore the rule rather than eliminating even more protections for Senate minorities. Bottom line is that the filibuster can be justified if it's used when the minority is particularly intense, and when it wins only if the majority is relatively indifferent. It seems safe to say that Mr. McConnell and the Republicans retained the legislative filibuster in 2017-18 only because they had a paltry legislative agenda. Democrats will eliminate it if it's all that stands between them and passing their agenda, and Republicans use it across the board to block everything without any interest in cutting deals. And even though Democrats may be the ones who deliver the final blow, historians will correctly put the blame, or the credit, squarely on Mitch McConnell and his Republicans. Politics around the web. 1. Ching Quan Lee at the Washington Post's monkey cage on the Hong Kong protests. 2. At Bloomberg Opinion, Timothy L. O'Brien argues that President Trump doesn't have a messiah complex, he's just pandering to those who want him to be. 1.3. Ed Kilgore at New York Magazine on Julian Castro and Animals. 4. Matt Iglesias at Vox on Michael Bennett's economic program. 5. In E.J. Dionne Jr. At the Washington Post on Mr. Trump and evangelicals. This article is part of David Leonhardt's newsletter. David is on a break until Labor Day. While he's away, 2 outside writers are taking his place. This week's author is Jonathan Bernstein, at JView, a columnist at Bloomberg Opinion. You can subscribe to Jonathan's regular newsletter, and you can sign up here to receive David's newsletter each weekday. If you are not a subscriber to this newsletter, you can subscribe here. You can also join me on Twitter, at @DeLeonhardt, and Facebook. Follow the New York Times opinion section on Facebook, Twitter, @NightOpinion, and Instagram. Let's block ads. Why?